My guest today is Asha Packman. Since 2017, Asha has been president of Meditation Australia, the national peak body representing meditation and meditation teachers. In the same year, Asha founded Fifth Direction, formerly Warrior Within. He's also an associate member of the Jung Society of Melbourne. Asha is a former editor of the Good Men Project, a regular speaker at conferences and events, also contributing to numerous websites and publications. After transitioning from a successful corporate career in 2011, Asha has grown to become a renowned mentor, meditation teacher, and guide. An avid scholar of the mythopoetic, he combines hard intelligence and story to reconnect you to your true nature. Following a series of significant life events, including the diagnosis of a progressive rare blood cancer, Asha shifted gears from his corporate existence to focus on health and well-being. Now holding qualifications in leadership, coaching, and mentoring, he's a certified heart math and Wim Hof method instructor, as well as a KRI certified Kundalini yoga teacher. He's further studied in Jungian core concepts, neo-shamanism, epigenetics, geobiology, and the social psychology of sport. Asha, thanks for joining us, mate.
That sounds like a mouthful when you put it that way, mate. It's been an interesting journey. Thanks for the full bio there, brother.
There's a lot going on, man. There's a lot behind that too.
Yeah, well, I guess you can pack a lot into 53 years, can't you?
Yeah, pretty much, man. Mate, just on that note, packing a fair bit into a short amount of time. One of the biggest things that you speak about, and I love this call, is that the longest journey. We'll come back to that in a moment. That the call is death is our greatest teacher. And this idea of time and this idea of what happens when time passes and knowing in every moment that we are going to die someday. Your own lived experience has shown this to be the case. Are you able to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's difficult to know where to begin this one. We're actually talking about endings, aren't we? But let's start somewhere. It seems to me in 2022, we've pretty much covered, nothing's taboo anymore. We've talked about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but I still think death is something I'm beginning to see more discussion about it. But really, for the most part, it's something that gets brushed under the rug. People don't want to talk about it or they shy away from it. And yeah, I believe I stand behind what I say there. I really think it's the teacher hidden in plain sight. If you weigh up the fact that you don't know how and you don't know when, but one day you're going to die. I think it just calls everything that's most important to you right to the forefront. How are you showing up in every single moment? And also it drives you towards kindness and compassion for others, and it really, it's the whole picture right there. I mean, it doesn't mean that every single moment needs to be some profound thing. It's just a gentle calling. Unconsciously in the background, we're moment to moment we're dealing with death. What do you do when you stop at the side of the road? You look left, you look right. We basically spend an enormous amount of time trying not to die subconsciously. So it's really just shifting a little bit of that into our conscious waking world, and seeing that it, rather than being something to be afraid of, you can actually derive enormous benefit from it.
So when you speak about death being our greatest teacher, one thing, young men in particular, they kind of live like they're never going to die. They've got that youth, they've got that invincibility of all the testosterone flowing through the blood and all that. How would you, partly they're probably more at risk for these activities, like a lot of the risk-taking activities. What sort of advice might you give to a young man in his teen years around things like death wisdom?
Yeah, look, I think it's a rite of passage to some degree. I mean, I think that particularly young men, they do go through that period. It's kind of, Freud might call it thanatos. You might have felt it too, brother, but, when you stand on the edge of that cliff, and you look over, there's this moment when you think to yourself, even if you're really happy, even if everything's going swimmingly in life, you kind of go, I could just jump. Like there's this kind of innate thanatos, which is kind of built into the human psyche, if you like. And I think that young men, we go through this period, certainly speaking for myself, and I'm sure for many others, where you are in that kind of zone where you are pushing the boundaries a little bit. And that's exactly what it is. It's just pushing the boundaries. But yeah, this idea of being sort of 10 foot tall and invincible is kind of a predominant way of being as a young man. I think, you know, we've talked a lot, you and I, about the book Iron John and Robert Bly. And you'll see in fairy tales a lot this idea of the white, the red, and the black in terms of the three kind of developmental phases of boy to man. And that phase is very much the red zone, you know. In King Arthur and those fairy tales, it would be the Red Knight, you know, who's always the one going charging off into battle, you know, with the sword held high and maybe not thinking too much about what could happen. So yeah, you know, and I think what happens is naturally that there's normally some sort of rite of passage into manhood when you do come face to face with the Grim Reaper in some way, you know, be that physically or metaphysically or however, and that can be through like a loss, you know, maybe the loss of a parent or something gets taken away from you. Maybe it's even a heartbreak. Maybe it's even, you know, the loss of a relationship or something, or the loss of a dog, or, you know, all these things can happen. And all of a sudden we get confronted with the reality that, you know, my life is only on rent. And, you know, the lady of death can come along and take it back whenever she so chooses. And that sort of penny dropping is a big moment for a lot of young men and it's not that they have to reel everything back in and start being really careful. It's just an awareness, you know, it's an awareness. And you can go about some of the similar activities if you like, but now you're paying attention. And as I said, it brings in this idea of the energetic heart, which is around kindness and compassion, and also to self, because there's a lot of these risk-taking behaviors, which is not very self-compassionate, is it? It's almost like my life doesn't mean very much. So, you know, whatever if I die, sort of thing. Well, now, no, actually, your life is of great consequence. And you've got instructions written on your soul that you're here to deliver to the world. So if you throw it away on some drunken night, then that's a great shame, because that message of which only you can deliver will not get delivered.
So just on that note, you know, the sanctity of someone's life, for example, a book was published a few years ago in the US called Deaths of Despair. And they categorize things like drug overdoses, alcohol poisoning and suicides in the same kind of category. It's deaths of despair, predominantly affecting young men. What is it that young men are desperate for? If we take that phrase, despair, what do you think young men are desperate for more than anything?
Oh man, for me, it's about being seen, particularly by older men, and being blessed. You know, a lot of young men just get told how shit they are and how they're fucking up. I'm assuming we can use technical terms on this podcast, brother, but yeah, you know, and being shown the negative side of how they're being, right? And what's missing is the blessing and the being seen, and, you know, the old man crossing the street to say to the young boy, I saw what you did there and it was good. You know, and that's a two-way street also, brother, because you need to be as an adult man, you need to be pretty grounded and in a place where that compliment actually lands, because there's such a thing as an empty blessing as well. And so what's required here is not just the young men being blessed, but it's the older men being grounded enough to be blessers, if you will. So, you know, we're lacking in elderhood. We're lacking in true elderhood in this culture, in this generation, both men and women. And our young people are crying out for it, even if they don't know it. You know, that they might see themselves being disrespectful to older people, and that might be part of the issue. But really, underneath that, they're actually crying out for someone to step up.
What can we do to bring it back?
Well, you know, I think that we can understand the role of elderhood a bit better. Not it simply being a function of getting older. It's not olderhood. It's actually something that you have to choose to become, and you have to actually step into that role and take on responsibility for it. You know, you don't just suddenly become a wise elder by becoming a grandfather. I remember Stephen Jenkinson talking about, you know, there seems to be this idea that the minute your son or your daughter gives birth to a progeny and you become a grandparent, all of a sudden you're a wise elder. It's like, and as he laughed, you didn't do anything to make that happen. It's like, you know, there needs to be a certain willingness to step into that role. And as I said, it doesn't just come through years. It comes through work and discipline.
You mentioned the idea that young guys are told that they're garbage and they feel, you know, like, oh, I'm worth nothing or I'm worthless or whatever. And I feel like a big part of what's going on with young men is this idea of for them to embrace their softer side or their more feminine side, they kind of need to disown the masculine side. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And clearly it's not as binary as that. And you know, I think it's a very good point that you make. You know, I'm always called to remember an ancient, some of the ancient cultures looking at I guess Western white man and saying that most young boys are given the 3-word curse when they're born, and that is be a man. And you know what's underlying all that is everything that you're speaking about there. You know, don't cry, don't show your soft side. You know, all these types of things. And I think from day one, you know, that's the kind of prism through which we see manhood. And it takes a certain amount of, you know, it comes back to this idea of grief and meeting death and these rites of passage to make you see that there's another way. It really interestingly, I was just the other day, I was talking to some guys in a meditation session. We were reminded of again Robert Bly and I and John. He talks about this idea of double-heartedness. He said, you know, in his view, he says that women are actually born with 2 hearts, one in the center of their chest and one energetic heart in their womb. And that's kind of the compassionate, kindness, intuitive kind of heart, you know. And he says men, you know, when we're born, we're told we simply have a physical heart, just the one. But he said men are double-hearted too. It's just that you have to earn that energetic heart, that second heart, through grief and through breaking the shell and breaking the armor, you know, which we've been handed down in terms of what we think it is to be a man. And once you crack through that armor, which is mostly a chest plate covering the heart, we too are double-hearted. It's just a different way in. If that, and that, I don't know, there's something in that. I know I'm speaking a bit metaphorically, but there was something in that which really lands for me, you know. And again, it loops right back to how we began this conversation with regards to the lack of initiation, the lack of rite of passage from boy into manhood, and the idea that this needs to have at its deepest phase some sort of recognition of your relationship with death. So we've kind of covered all the bits now and brought it all back to the same conversation.
Just want to piece apart the idea about so you spoke about, you know, you got the armor plate and grief is the path to men receiving that second heart, if you will. And you've also said in the past that, you know, the longest journey that a man will make is the 8 inches between his head and his heart. Is grief the only thing that will break that open, or is there work that men can do to open themselves up more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's other ways. I just think grief is such a huge missing piece in today's culture. I mean, grief is we're almost told to actively avoid it, you know. And if you see someone in grief, you know, our automatic assumption is that we need to get them out of it as quickly as possible. So as a culture, we've kind of completely dismissed the art of grief, if you will. And you only have to go back to any of the ancient cultures. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Africa and just saw how grief was handled there, and it's totally different. You know, it couldn't be more different. So for me, I think taking that piece away is a major part of it. But there's certainly other ways in. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you can come directly at it through the emotion which is on the other side of that coin of grief, and that's love. You know, grief is really just a recognition of having lost something you love. So grief and love are completely connected. You know, in fact, you know, I've been recently reading a lot from Martin Prechtel, who wrote a beautiful book on grief, and his view is very simple. Grief is praise. Grief is praise for what you love. So, for men, sometimes it's difficult. You ask a man to feel into the center of his chest and notice what's there and say, can you feel love? And often it's difficult to get to because of this chest plate. But if their heart is cracked open through grief, through having lost something that they did love, but maybe didn't recognize it that way, then you can sort of see how that could be a pathway for many men, and if you think about it, Nick, we met through the Fifth Direction, through the men's community there. And if you look at what the average of the man that shows up there, he's come into contact with just something which has caused him grief. And then I get a knock on the door, or we get a knock on the door as that community, and it's like, oh, my wife just left me, or I've got cancer, or I'm bankrupt, or something, and so grief has come a knocking. And given that the only plan, they've had plan A through plan A, which is simply be stoic, and once something gets in behind the armor, they've got no tools. And so it's teaching these men to say, actually, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity. Let's go use the metaphor we've been working with. This is an opportunity to become double-hearted. If you just surrender instead of pushing it away like you've done all your life. Yeah. So that's why I get to the grief piece. It's certainly not the only way, but from what I've seen, having been deeply immersed in men's work for many years now, is that so often that's the process that needs to happen.
You mentioned before about the initiation bit for young men, and typically that looks like drinking or drag racing or some sort of risk-taking behavior. What is there at the moment that you're seeing that could replace that with something a bit more positive?
Look, I think there's plenty of good work out there at the moment, but let's take a step backwards and ask ourselves why young boys are engaging in that behavior. It's because innately there's an urge in them to be initiated. There's an urge in them which, deep inside their psyche, which understands that this is the alchemizing process which needs to happen for me to kill off the boy and become a man, and nothing's available. I look around and nothing's available. So young boys do the only thing that will be natural to them, and that is initiate each other. So, everything you've spoken about, including getting tattoos, including scarring the skin, including, a whole list of activities. It's simply the soul calling to them and saying, you need initiation. And then when you look with your eyes, you can't see anything. And so all the young boys who need initiating and do it to each other. And you see it in frat houses, and often it turns out to be, treating women, young girls, very badly. These are all just ways of trying to initiate one another into manhood, and they come out distorted and really harmful to yourself and to others. Oftentimes taking your own life, accidentally or otherwise. So yeah, I'm really gladdened to see so many opportunities for men or young boys becoming apparent now, like certainly in the last decade or so, rites of passage, like all sorts of them. Our way is just one, but whether it's going out on wilderness retreats, all sorts of different ways. You definitely don't have to look terribly far right now to find really good places and facilitators doing this kind of work. I mean, I could list many. Maybe pop a few links in the podcast at the end. But yeah, they're out there, no doubt about it. And I'm particularly enjoying the fact that fathers are recognizing this, and they're actually, even in many cases, like working with their sons and going into these types of arrangements together. How beautiful is that? And almost saying, I don't have the tools. It wasn't available to me, but I'm going to make damn sure it's available to you, and I'm going with you, and that's appropriate, but there will be a point where the father and the son need to separate to go off for part of that journey.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Just on that note, mate, you've got a young fella of your own, and he's a bit off adolescence now, but what would be the one thing that you would like to do differently, or you would like to see unfold differently through his transition into adulthood?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's really more thinking about what I can do now, and what I can do moving forward. Like, he's only 7 years old, so what would I do differently? Look, I think, I can't change that. And there's certain things that I wish it had unfolded differently for him, which are completely out of my control, like, separating from his mum and things like that. These are things that, but in some sense, that's been a blessing too. So, what can I do moving forward is just making sure all these things we're speaking about here, that he has the opportunity for that, and just developing him into a man, not through that 3-word curse, and letting him find his own way with soft guidance, and sometimes when he needs it, not so soft. It's just allowing himself to shape himself into who he is and become himself.
Mm. So just on that note, it was a bit more around the idea of like not wanting to pass on our own stuff, like rather than, what would you have done differently? Not so much changing the past, but I've heard a call that we're kind of the best and worst of our own parents. And like, how do we recognize the wheat from the chaff and then put the work in? So from a father's point of view, like what sort of thing might you encourage a father listening to this, for example, to do?
Yeah, look, I think the starting point is understanding who you are, because you're not going to be able to help your son very much if you don't know who you are. So I think the work starts as a father with, on yourself, and understanding the father energy, like archetypally. It's complicated, and so I think doing the deep work on self first is the way to begin, and that way you understand inside you, whether you're listening to your father's voice or your mother's voice or society's voice or the voice that tells you what you should do, and really being able to discern that to the subtle voice, which is your own, and understanding your values and what you stand up for, and what you're all about. And then, doing your best to kind of come from that place with your son, but also understanding that you're not trying to shape a little you. So you're not trying to like say, these are the values. It's actually coming from that place of knowing thyself so that you can be of the most assistance to him as he develops into his own person, if that makes sense. And knowing that, you're going to constantly fuck up. I mean, that's also cool. That's also archetypally given. If you think about well, I guess, let's talk about the father energy for a moment. I mean, that on it has its bipolar shadows, and on one side you've got what I would call kind of the Saturn energy, the Saturn father energy, which is kind of like all devouring, the father that's so totally in the son's business that it's almost like suffocating. It's claustrophobic, and that's one way of, and controlling, and also that type of energy is the son can never do well enough. If the son comes home from school with an A, he should have got an A+. And you as a father feel like you're just driving him to the best of his capabilities, but it's not really. It's just a swing to the Saturn energy too much, And on the other side of the coin, so you've basically got the Jupiter energy, which is the absent father, You basically just, the absent father, the line might be, go ask your mum. It's just basically abdicating the throne of fatherhood completely, away for long periods of time, and kind of just, not really engaging. And I think if you're honest with yourself, certainly from my point of view, I can only speak about me, I certainly find myself at the extremes of both those energies at times. And so it's not sort of saying that they don't exist. It's kind of like understanding that this is the archetypal energy of father, and, working within those parameters, and paying attention and noticing how you're showing up, and really becoming very, very conscious of your own fathering, and to understand also that you're playing a second role as father, and that is fathering the inner child within yourself too, and sometimes we can conflate that with fathering our son. They're different beings. They both require fathering.
So fathering the inner child, I'm going to hit you with a cliche question, Asha. What do you tell teenage Asha? if you could go back?
Oh, myself, it would be just don't worry so much. You know, I went through my teenage years with you know, high functioning anxiety, depression, which part of which was carried down on both sides of my family in different ways, but certainly there. And yeah, you know, I spent an extraordinary amount of time worrying and being caught in my head. And my way of dealing with that was just through, you know, inappropriate coping mechanisms to just numb it all out through, you know, drugs and alcohol and partying too hard and that type of behavior. So, you know, rather than say don't party too hard, my advice would be just don't worry so much. You know, just put my arm around myself and say, you know, it's going to be all right. Yeah, which is maybe something I didn't get from my own father.
Asher, I appreciate you've offered a fair bit of your time for me this afternoon, and I just want to finish on one final note, just around the meditation bit. If someone was listening to the podcast and they were new to the idea of meditation, what would you encourage them to do if they were just getting into it?
Just start. Like, honestly, you know, I always go back to that William Wordsworth quote, to begin. Like, I think we can, again, you know, get so caught up in what style should I do? Am I doing it right? Am I, you know, should it be this or that, you know, style of meditation? Really just begin, you know, just spend some time, you know, even if it's 5 minutes a day, and just close down the eyes and just notice, just understand that behind your thinking, there's an observer. And the observer is not caught up in all the emotions of what's going on in the external world. They're just there, they're just present, and nothing changes. And it's really about closing your eyes and just tuning into that part of yourself. You know, I think the best metaphor that I've always found is simply be the sky. You know, we're so caught up with the weather. You know, it's like it's raining, it's this, it's that, and it's thunderstorms and it's clouds, or like, and those events are all passing. But behind that is always the sky, and the sky's big enough to hold any weather, and it's always just there, you know. And so for me, it's just, you know, don't get so caught up in the technique or the practice. Just close your eyes and be the sky. As much as I can say that with you know, with honesty and integrity. But that's all it really is, and the rest of it will just take care of itself. And if you can only hold that for 1 minute, that's fine. But you know, it's a start. And we just go from there. You know, once you start doing that, you'll find yourself drawn to maybe different kinds of practices and different kind of techniques, and that's okay too. But what I would say is, if you do find a meditation practice, stick with it for at least, you know, 40 days in a row, maybe 100 days in a row if you can, and don't judge it at all. And even at all, you know, that would be ideal. But if you're looking back on what's changed and it's been less than that time, then you're really not giving it a fair crack. You know what I mean? And I find a lot of people that they'll do one meditation for 5 days and another one for 1 day. Like you're up on Insight Timer, like changing every single day to try and find exactly the right. That's all up in your head. For me, it's like, just find something and just do it every single day for 100 days, and then tell me how you're going.
Yeah, I love it. Even just whatever it is, even cleaning like a bookshelf every day for 100 days, like it's just a ritual, right? It's just...
And if you did that every day, I promise you, man, you'd look back and you'd see big changes. You know, you know, coming into mindfulness, anything's mindfulness practice. You know, you can make it about how great your coffee tastes. You know, do that for 100 days. Like literally stop and just taste it in your mouth and go, oh my God. Like, and that can be your meditation practice for 100 days, and you'll notice changes. You know, so one of the other things I like, maybe even doing something which requires you to actually focus. Like I've said to people in the past, try brushing your teeth with the other hand for 100 days. Right now, you can make that that can really be a mindfulness practice, because it's not easy. And so all of a sudden you find yourself really focusing on one thing, and all the other thoughts just drop away. Because trust me, you've got to focus when you're brushing your teeth with your other hand, because it's not easy. So maybe that's all it is to begin with, you know. just start somewhere.
Awesome, dude. And if people wanted to do some more work with you, you're running Fifth Direction now, which was the Warrior Within, which we did last year. But just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that began in 2017, just with a bunch of guys meditating in my house, and yeah, I mean, you know, in a nutshell, how that started was men came to me and said that there wasn't a place that they could meditate as men, you know, come together as men, and that back in that time. It's only 5-6 years ago, but you know, a lot of the yoga studios, and they still are, they're quite feminine places. You know, they're often run by women, and you know, you walk in, you got the flowers and the essential oils, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you know, the guys came to me, and their call was, where can we just come together as men and meditate? And I said, well, my house, you know. And we ran a little sort of jammed together a little 6-week course on meditation, and ended up with quite a big number at my house, and that got bigger and bigger and bigger until my house wasn't able to have that many people in it. And so we got a little studio, and it kind of got bigger and bigger. But what we did find, this is the interesting thing, that we'd meditate, and then at the end we'd start sharing, you know, and people would talk about what was going in their lives and some personal stuff, and men were incredibly supportive to one another, and it became as much a meditation circle as a men's circle, as a sharing circle. And things just expanded. You know, we went to Facebook, and then it blew out to, you know, a big number. And then, so we built an app, and I think that's where you sort of came along, and we connected up with the Minnesota Men's Conference and some other, you know, real originators of the mythopoetic men's work from back in the 80s. And it all just kind of went from there. And, you know, just this year in February, now we've opened up to all genders, to women as well. And so now, starting next month, we'll have something like 16 sessions a week, you know, from meditation to breath work to myth to sitting with elders to you know, all sorts of different discussions with kind of thought leaders from all over the world. And you know, there'll be some men's sessions in there, there'll be some women's sessions in there, and there'll be some sessions that are open to all genders. And we're not going to get it completely right, but you know, the idea is just to keep on working and fine tuning, and until we build a you know, just an incredibly strong community of whole humans. You know, that's the plan.
Awesome, dude. And how can people find out about that?
Well, I mean, to join the community, it's free. I mean, some of the sessions you need to pay for, but the baseline community, and there's a number of free sessions and free resources that you can get, you know, without even having to pay anything at all. So that's just simply downloading. Just search for Fifth Direction at your app store, whether it's Apple or Google, and just download it to your phone. And then once you've got your profile, you can. It all happens on the web as well, so you can access it all from your laptop and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a really amazing community in there. As I said, we've got some incredible partnerships with amazing teachers from all over the world, and that's about to, you know, really expand now that we've kind of opened it up beyond just men. So it's a really exciting time to actually jump in and join us.
Love it. I can vouch for that, man.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure having you around, Nick. And you know, you went through kind of the real immersion, the real deep course, and it was a pleasure to have you. And you know, as well as, you know, hopefully learning some stuff yourself. You're amazing in terms of what you were able to kind of pay forward to the other guys that were participating as well. So yeah, it's an honor to have you on board.
Oh, thanks, bro. And it's from an elder who doesn't give out empty blessings. That does mean a lot. So thank you, man. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Awesome, Asher. We'll leave it there, brother. Thanks so much
Cool.
for your time, man.
No worries. That was great. I enjoyed that.